Drive, now. The child in the backseat of his car barely reached 6 years old, but there was something in her voice that made James Whitmore obey without question. He didn't know that this small girl, with dirty clothes and eyes that had seen too much, was about to reveal a conspiracy involving the two people he trusted most in the world. Before we dive into this thrilling story, please leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your presence means so much to us. Enjoy this journey of faith and hope. The drizzle had begun to make the cobblestones slippery when James Whitmore stepped out of the historic hotel. The night air carried the salty whisper of Charleston harbor mixed with the faint aroma of magnolia blossoms that persisted even in early spring. It was the kind of night tourists called romantic, but for James, it was just another long walk to his car after another endless evening of polite conversation and empty congratulations. The investors had been enthusiastic about the restoration deal he'd closed. They toasted him with champagne. They said he was visionary. And yet, walking alone beneath the old gas lamps, James felt that familiar weight in his chest, the kind that no deal, no applause, no luxury seemed able to lift. He adjusted the lapel of his navy blue tailored suit and looked down the quiet street toward his white Range Rover parked under a leafy oak tree. He liked this street for its tranquility, no rushing traffic, no curious eyes. He had built a life where every detail was under his control, or so he believed. Halfway to the car, he slowed his pace. Something about the stillness seemed different. Not exactly dangerous, but watchful. His shoes clicked on the wet stones as he approached the vehicle. He pressed the remote, and the locks opened with a soft click. Sliding into the driver's seat, James inhaled the familiar scent of leather and cedar wax that lingered from last week's detailing. For a moment, the world outside ceased to matter. Then, cold fingers pressed firmly against his mouth. He froze. "Don't say anything." The voice was a whisper, trembling but certain. "They're listening." His eyes shot to the rearview mirror. Huddled in the back seat was a small girl, no more than 6 years old. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks dirty, but her hazel eyes were wide and fixed on his, brimming with a fear that made his pulse hammer. James slowly pulled her hand from his mouth, speaking low. "Who are you? What are you doing in my car?" "Please," she whispered, looking toward the dark street beyond the windshield. "Don't talk loud. They're out there." His brow furrowed. "Who's out there?" She moved forward, gripping the back of his seat. "The people who want to hurt you. They said you'd be here. They said you always park in the same spot. They've been talking about you for days." James tried to make sense of her words, studying her small, earnest face. "Where did you hear this?" Her voice wavered, but didn't break. "At the seafood warehouse near the docks. I sleep there sometimes when it's too cold outside. I heard them say your name. They said after Thursday you won't be around anymore." The words hit him harder than expected. There was no way this child could know his name, let alone his schedule. Yet there she was, trembling in his back seat, speaking with the certainty of someone who had seen and heard too much. "I think you're confusing people," James began, though his voice lacked conviction. "I don't even know you." She gave a weak smile, almost hurt. "Yes, you do. You gave me a sandwich once and some money. It was raining and I was hungry. You didn't ask me anything. You just handed it over." James remembered a small, shivering figure outside his office building last winter. He had been late for a meeting and hadn't thought about it since. "You remembered that?" he asked quietly. "No one's ever been kind to me without wanting something in return," she said, her gaze steady now. "When I heard them talking about you, I knew I had to warn you." The honesty in her voice lodged somewhere deep inside him. He wanted to believe she was just a frightened child making up a story, but something about her composure, her choice of words, disturbed him. "What's your name?" "Lucy," she said softly. "Lucy Harper." He repeated without thinking. "Lucy." Her head turned sharply toward the street, eyes narrowing. "It's him." James followed her gaze to where, under the yellow glow of a streetlight, a tall man in a long raincoat stood perfectly still, facing their car. Even from there, James could see the man's gaze fixed in his direction. "Drive," Lucy said urgently. James hesitated. The man began walking slow and deliberate steps toward them, as if the street belonged to him. The rhythm of those steps, unhurried but determined, sent a ripple of unease through James. "Now!" Lucy hissed. James turned the key and the Range Rover came to life. The man's pace quickened. James pulled away from the curb, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The man had stopped in the middle of the street, watching them leave, his silhouette shrinking in the mist. They drove in silence for several blocks, the only sounds being the soft patter of rain on the windshield and the occasional squeak of the wipers. Finally, James looked at her in the mirror. "Lucy, I need you to tell me everything." She hesitated, then leaned closer to the back of his seat. "They were at the warehouse talking about some meeting on Thursday. They knew what time you leave work, where you go for dinner. They know your house. They even know what kind of car you drive. They said you were getting in the way." James gripped the steering wheel tighter. His life wasn't chaotic. He avoided trouble. And yet this little girl was describing a level of surveillance he couldn't ignore. "Who are these people?" "I don't know all the names. Just Robert and Ellen." The names sent a cold shiver through him. Robert Langston, his college friend, business partner of 15 years. Ellen Shaw, his personal assistant who had managed his schedule, his correspondence, his life for over a decade. "Are you sure?" he asked, almost hoping she would take back the words. She nodded. "I heard them. They said your name over and over. They said you wouldn't see it coming." James let out a slow sigh. The streetlights passed in watery streaks. He tried to shake off the chill settling over him, but Lucy's words clung stubbornly. He turned toward the waterfront. "Let's talk somewhere safe, somewhere quiet." "They'll follow you," she murmured. He looked at her again, taking in her small frame, the damp cuffs of her sleeves, the dirt smeared on her cheek. He didn't want to admit it, but there was something about her calm urgency that disturbed him more than the sight of the man in the raincoat. "Lucy." He slowed at the traffic light, the faint reflection of her face visible in the glass. "Why help me? You don't even know me." She lowered her gaze to her hands. "Because you were the only person who saw me and didn't look away." The light turned green. He continued driving, the city opening before them in a silent expanse of glistening streets and shadowy alleys. Somewhere in those shadows, if she was right, people he trusted were planning to end his career. Maybe more. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had built his life on precision, control, knowing every move before it happened. But tonight, control had quietly slipped into the back seat of his car with a 6-year-old child who was about to change everything. And somewhere in the back of his mind, James already knew this was just the beginning. Late-night coffee. The mist had thickened when James guided the Range Rover away from the quiet streets toward the waterfront. He found a small cafe at the edge of the marina, one of the few places in Charleston where locals outnumbered tourists after nightfall. The aroma of coffee drifted from the front porch, where 2 fishermen nursed steaming mugs, their rain jackets draped over chairs. Inside, the hum of conversation was low, the kind of background murmur that let private words disappear into the noise. James took Lucy to a booth in the back corner. A waitress with tired eyes and a soft, low-country accent placed 2 mugs down before he even ordered. "On the house, honey. Y'all look like you need it," she said, her gaze lingering on Lucy with silent concern. Lucy gave her a small, polite nod. James wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. "All right," he began, leaning forward. "You said you heard Robert and Ellen. Tell me exactly what you heard." Lucy hesitated, her eyes drifting to the window. "They didn't see me. I was hiding under some nets near the back of the warehouse. They were talking about Thursday, about a meeting with important people. They said you'd never see it coming. They laughed about it." "Did they say what would happen Thursday?" His voice was calm, but each word felt like a stone in his chest. Her lips tightened. "They said you wouldn't be around anymore, that you were getting in the way, and something about contracts. I don't understand it all." Contracts. The word landed like a weight. James had a meeting Thursday with an investment group from New York, one that could change his company's future. Contracts would be signed. Control would change hands, but Robert had been handling negotiations alongside him. Ellen had been running all the logistics. He stared at his coffee without tasting it. "Lucy, you're telling me that my closest friend and the person I trust most at work are planning something against me. I'm telling you they said your name," she replied, her voice small but firm, and they seemed happy about what was coming. The bell above the cafe door chimed, and James looked up instinctively. A woman in a soft blue dress and raincoat entered, shaking drops from her hair. Her eyes found his almost instantly. She smiled. Detective Caroline Fields. Detective Caroline Fields had been part of James's life since high school. Though their paths had diverged after graduation, hers to law enforcement, his to the golden corridors of real estate wealth, they had crossed paths over the years, each time with the faint sense of something unfinished between them. "James Whitmore," she said, sliding into the booth across from him before he could stand. "Thought that was your car outside. You don't usually come to this side of the marina at night." His pulse quickened a beat. "Caroline, it's been a while." Her gaze shifted to Lucy, curiosity flickering. "And who's this?" Lucy lowered her eyes, clutching the edge of her sweater. "This is Lucy," James said, his tone protective. "She's a friend." Caroline's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't press. "Well, your friend here has the sharpest eyes I've seen all night, and I should know. I've been on shift since noon." James hesitated. How much could he tell without sounding unbalanced? How much should he trust anyone now? Caroline leaned in, reading his face. "Something's wrong. You're doing that thing you do when you're holding back half the story." He almost smiled despite himself. "Some habits never change. Some people never change," she replied gently. "Tell me." Lucy looked at him, then at Caroline. "Can we trust her?" she whispered. James met Caroline's steady gaze, the same one that had gotten him out of more than one bad idea as a teenager. "Yes," he said quietly, "we can." And so, in low, measured words, he told her about Lucy appearing in his car, about the names she had heard, about Thursday. Caroline listened without interrupting, her expression tightening only once when he mentioned Robert Langston's name. "Robert's been in trouble before," she admitted after a pause. "Not the kind that makes the papers, but enough that I've heard his name whispered in the wrong rooms." James sat back, disturbed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because nothing ever stuck, and because you always trusted him. I figured you knew him better than anyone." Lucy shifted in her seat, her voice small but certain. "Sometimes the people you think you know best are the ones who surprise you most." The truth in her words stung. James looked at her, then at Caroline. "So what do I do? Cancel Thursday? Confront them?" "Not yet," Caroline said firmly. "If Lucy's right, they'll just change the plan. You need to know exactly what they're doing and why, and you can't do that if they think you're onto them." James nodded slowly, the pieces shifting in his mind. "So I pretend to go along for now, and you keep me informed," Caroline added. "If this is as serious as it sounds, you're going to need proof and a plan." The waitress returned with a slice of pie, placing it in front of Lucy. "On the house, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm. Lucy's eyes widened, as if she hadn't seen a piece of pie that size in months. She looked at James, hesitant. "Is it okay?" He nodded, and something in her shoulders relaxed for the first time that night. Caroline sipped her coffee, her gaze never leaving his. "You've always been good at fixing broken houses, James. Let's see if you can fix this one before it falls down around you." Outside, the rain had diminished to a mist, the marina lights twinkling over the water. James knew they couldn't linger. Too many eyes, too many variables. But for the first time since that night began, he felt the faintest glimmer of something he hadn't dared hope for. A plan was forming, and he wasn't completely alone. No surveillance and distrust. The marina air was heavier now, the rain diminished to a mist that clung to skin and hair. James kept glancing toward the cafe window, scanning the dark street beyond for shapes that didn't belong. Lucy sat between him and the wall in the booth, her hands wrapped protectively around the warm coffee mug like it was a shield. Caroline still leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes steady on him, as if she could keep him anchored just by looking. "You're quieter than I've ever seen you," she said softly. James exhaled through his nose. "Because for the first time in a long time, I don't know who to trust." Caroline didn't look away. "You can trust me. I know." His voice was quiet but certain. And yet, even saying it, he thought of Robert, of Ellen, the two people who had stood by him for years. He had given his loyalty without question. And now, a 6-year-old child he barely knew was saying they were conspiring against him. Lucy looked between them. "She's right. You need someone you can trust, and you need someone who knows how to watch people without being seen." James studied her, curious. "You mean you?" She nodded, her expression serious. "I've been watching people my whole life. On the streets, if you don't, bad things happen." Caroline tilted her head toward Lucy. "She's smart. You should listen to her." The waitress came with the check, though she gave James a knowing look that said payment was optional that night. He left a folded bill on the table anyway and stood. "We should go. Staying in one place too long makes us easy to find." Outside, the night seemed quieter than it had a right to. The marina lights were soft pools on the slippery pavement, and the water lapped gently against the docks. They walked toward the Range Rover, Lucy between them. Caroline's hand touched his arm lightly, a small contact that sent an unexpected rush through him. It had been years since he'd felt that spark of connection with her, years since he'd allowed himself to. When they reached the car, Caroline hesitated. "I should get back. My shift technically ended an hour ago, but you have my number. If anything changes, anything, call me." James opened the door, bracing one hand on the roof as he met her eyes. "Caroline, this isn't just business trouble. I think they're going to try to take everything, not just the company." Her brow furrowed. "Then you need to decide what you're fighting for, your company or yourself." Before he could answer, Lucy tugged his sleeve. "And me," she whispered. Something shifted inside him. The company had been his entire identity for decades. But tonight, there was this little girl clinging to him as if he were the only person left who could protect her. Caroline looked at Lucy, then back at him. "I'll check on you tomorrow." Her eyes softened just for a second. "Stay safe, James." He watched her walk away, her raincoat catching the streetlight, her steps measured and sure. He remembered the younger Caroline laughing with him on warm summer nights by the water, challenging him to races along the dock, her hair flying behind her. She had always been part of him, even when life had pulled them apart. Inside the car, Lucy buckled herself in without being asked. "She likes you," she said matter-of-factly. James blinked. "Excuse me?" "She looks at you like my mom used to look at my dad in old photos before he left." He started the engine, the hum filling the quiet space between them. "She's an old friend," he said carefully. "Sometimes old friends are more than that," Lucy replied, with the kind of wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone her age. They drove toward East Bay Street, where the brick sidewalks gleamed under the mist. James found himself thinking about Caroline's words, about deciding what he was fighting for, the company, himself, or the people who were unexpectedly sliding into the territory of his heart. Lucy broke the silence. "You're thinking about her?" He laughed softly despite himself. "You don't miss much, do you?" "No," she said, popping the pea. "And I don't think you should fight for your company if it means losing people who care about you." Her words hit harder than expected. He navigated toward the quieter residential streets, away from the tourist-heavy market district. "I need to get you somewhere safe tonight." Lucy tilted her head. "What about you?" "I'll be fine." She gave him a look that made it clear she didn't believe him. "Safe like you wanted me to be when you gave me food, or safe like you're telling yourself not to worry about me?" The question lodged in his throat. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled over on a street lined with ancient oaks and grand porches gleaming softly in the night. Ahead, the warm lights of a familiar inn spilled over the wet sidewalk. "This will do for now," he said, parking. Inside, he greeted the innkeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Thatcher, who recognized him from a past charity event. He asked for a small room under a different name. No questions, no confusion. Mrs. Thatcher had that southern grace that came with discretion. Back at the car, Lucy looked at the inn, her face unreadable. "It's beautiful. You'll be comfortable here. I'll check on you in the morning." She didn't move. "What if they come here?" "They won't," he assured her, though he wasn't entirely certain. "And if they do, Mrs. Thatcher will keep you safe. She's tougher than she looks." Lucy still didn't unbuckle. "I don't like you being out there alone." James crouched slightly so his face was level with hers. "Lucy, you did something extraordinary tonight. You told me the truth when it mattered most. Now it's my turn to protect you. That's the deal." She searched his face, then finally nodded. "Okay, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." The words felt heavier than they should, but he meant them. He walked her inside, the inn smelling faintly of lavender and wood polish. Mrs. Thatcher took her upstairs, while James remained in the front hall, the old pine floors creaking softly under his weight. Through the window, the mist had thickened again, turning the world beyond into a hazy blur. Caroline's parting words echoed in his mind. "Decide what you're fighting for." He wasn't sure yet, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just about contracts or business anymore. It was about trust. It was about loyalty. And maybe, just maybe, it was about the possibility of something more than survival. When Mrs. Thatcher returned, she patted his arm. "She'll be fine here, and so will you if you don't let whatever's chasing you catch up." James gave her a weak smile and stepped back out into the misty night, the door closing softly behind him. The Range Rover waited under the dripping oak, a silent reminder that the rest of the night still lay ahead and that the game had only just begun. Endure nighttime encounters. Charleston's streets gleamed under the misty night, each lamppost haloed in gold. James drove the Range Rover down East Bay Street, past shuttered shops and silent brick-fronted houses. The city breathed quietly now, but every corner seemed like it might be holding something or someone waiting. He glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. He had left Lucy at the inn less than an hour ago, but it already felt wrong to be away from her. He told himself she was safe. Mrs. Thatcher would keep her safe. Still, his instincts carried a restless agitation. The thought of going home didn't feel right. His imposing house in the historic district was too predictable, too easy for anyone who knew his habits, which apparently was exactly the case, to find him. Instead, he turned toward the Battery, Charleston's iconic waterfront promenade. It was usually quiet at this hour, the kind of place where he could park, think, and watch the harbor lights stretch like ribbons over the water. But when he pulled into one of the small parallel spots along the seawall, that restless discomfort twisted into a knot. A figure was already there, tall, square-shouldered, a long raincoat falling almost to his shoes. The man stood perfectly still under a streetlight, facing the harbor, hands in his pockets. His head turned slowly when James's headlights swept over him, and even from behind the glass, James could feel the weight of the man's stare. He cut the engine. For a moment, neither moved. Then the man began walking toward him, slow and deliberate steps, as if he had all the time in the world. James's pulse quickened. He kept his eyes on the man in the rearview mirror. The space between them was shrinking with each step, and then a sharp knock on the passenger window startled him. He turned to find Caroline leaning toward the glass, rain beading her hair. "Mind if I get in?" James exhaled, unlocking the door. She slid inside, bringing with her the scent of damp air and warm cedar. "You have a talent for showing up at the right time," he said, his voice lower than usual. Her eyes flicked toward the streetlight where the man had been standing. "I saw him from half a block away. He's been hanging around the Battery too much lately. Don't know his name, but he's not just taking a midnight stroll." James studied her. "You've been following me." "I call it keeping an eye on you," she said, her tone light, but her eyes serious. "You've gotten into something, James, and I don't like how many shadows are following you around." He leaned back in his seat, the weight of her words pressing down. "If you're right, and Lucy's right, then Robert and Ellen aren't just trying to undermine me in business. This is deeper, more personal." Caroline turned to him completely, her voice softening. "I know you, James. You carry things alone until they crush you. Don't do that now. Not with this." Her proximity, the way her eyes held his, made the air feel heavier in the car. He wanted to tell her everything, how the betrayal gnawed at him, how Lucy's trust was now his responsibility, how he couldn't stop thinking about what Thursday might bring. But the words seemed dangerous in the open air. Instead, he nodded toward the streetlight. He's still there. The man in the raincoat had stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, positioned at an angle that let him keep the Range Rover in sight. He wasn't moving toward them now, but he wasn't leaving either. Caroline shifted. "Drive. Don't make it obvious, but let's see if he follows." James started the engine, pulling away from the seawall. He checked the mirror. The man didn't move at first. Then casually, he began walking in the same direction they'd gone. A tingle ran up James's neck. "That's exactly why I didn't go home tonight." Caroline looked at him. "So you were right, but we need to talk about something else. Robert Langston. Did you know he's been having closed-door meetings at the Palmer Club almost every night this week?" James frowned. "The Palmer Club. That's where half the old money in town conducts business they don't want on paper. And he's not going alone," she added. "Ellen's been there too." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "They're planning something big. They're counting on you continuing to do what you always do. Trust them." Her words landed harder than expected. He let them sit there for a moment, his thoughts shifting to Lucy's voice in the cafe, telling him to be careful, saying that the people he thought he knew best were the ones he should watch. He turned onto a side street lined with ancient oaks, whose branches intertwined overhead like interlaced fingers. "Caroline, I don't know who's listening anymore. Even my own phone doesn't feel safe." She leaned toward him, her tone soft but firm. "Then keep your circle small, smaller than it's ever been. Right now, it's you, me, and Lucy. That's it." He looked at her, holding her gaze for a beat longer than he should have. There was something solid about her, something grounded that made the chaos of the night seem a little less impossible. Her phone buzzed. She checked it, her brow tightening. "Someone just ran your plates through the police database." James blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means someone wants to know exactly where you are right now." His stomach sank. "So they'll know I've been here." "Which means," she said, "you need to move." He pressed the accelerator, the Range Rover gliding through the wet streets. The man in the raincoat had vanished from the mirrors now, but the feeling he'd left behind clung stubbornly. Caroline rested her arm on the console, leaning slightly toward him. "James, I need you to promise me something. If Thursday comes and you're not sure who to trust in that meeting, you walk out. Don't sign. Don't agree to anything." Her voice carried something more than professional caution. It was personal, deeply personal. "I'll think about it," he said. "Don't think," she replied, her eyes fixed on his. "Decide now." They stopped outside her building, a modest brick complex squeezed between two grander structures. She lingered in the passenger seat. "You're in the middle of something ugly, but..." Her lips curved slightly. "You still have allies." He gave half a smile. "One very determined ally." "Two," she corrected, nodding toward the empty space in the back seat where Lucy had been earlier. "Don't forget her." She got out, the mist curling around her as she walked toward her door. James watched her go, the glow of her porch light catching the shine of raindrops in her hair. When she disappeared inside, he leaned back in the driver's seat, the engine's hum still in his ears. Out there somewhere, Robert and Ellen were making their moves. Somewhere closer than he'd like, a man in a raincoat was watching. And in a small room at the inn, a 6-year-old girl was counting on him. The night seemed to be closing in, but the game had changed. And James knew that Thursday was no longer just a date on the calendar. It was the moment when everything would shift. The morning of revelation. The next morning arrived wrapped in Charleston's pale mist, the kind that muted colors and made the city seem to be holding its breath. James stood at his office window, coffee in hand, watching the white veil settle over the harbor. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the silhouette from the night before, always watching, always close enough to remind him he was never truly alone. On his desk lay a thin folder. Inside, printouts of Thursday's meeting agenda prepared by Ellen. The pages were meticulous, precise, exactly what he'd expect from her. Except now, every neatly typed bullet point seemed like a trap. The intercom buzzed. Ellen's voice, warm and professional as always, floated through. "James, Robert's here. Says it's urgent." A twist of unease coiled through his stomach. He pressed the button. "Send him in." Robert Langston entered like he owned the place. Tailored suit, easy smile, that casual confidence that had once been their greatest shared asset. But today, James saw it differently. It was the smile of a man who thought he held the advantage. "Morning, partner," Robert said, dropping into the chair across from James's desk. "You look tired. Burning the candle at both ends again?" "Something like that," James replied evenly. "What's so urgent?" Robert leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "I've been thinking we should get ahead of Thursday's meeting, maybe even move it up a day. Show them we're decisive." James kept his expression neutral, but inside the alarm bells were deafening. "Why the rush?" "Momentum," Robert said smoothly. "We have their attention. Let's close the deal before they start shopping around." James studied him for a beat. "And you think moving the date will help us?" "I think it'll help everyone," Robert replied, his smile widening just a fraction too much. James knew that smile. It was the one Robert used when he was keeping something to himself. He leaned back in his chair. "I'll think about it." The moment Robert left, James pressed the intercom again. "Ellen, hold all my calls for the next hour." "Of course," she said, her voice perfectly steady. But even in those 3 words, James swore he could hear the faintest note of calculation. He no longer trusted this building. He no longer trusted these walls. An hour later, he was at the Marina Diner with Caroline, in the same booth as before. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes fixed on him. "You're sure he suggested moving the meeting?" "Not just suggested, pushed hard for it." "That means whatever they're planning is ready now," she said. "And if you won't agree, they might try to force your hand." James frowned. "I can't just cancel, that would tip them off." Caroline shook her head. "I'm not saying cancel, I'm saying buy time. Make them believe you're still on their side. Buy time to figure out exactly what they want." James looked toward the window where the mist still clung to the streets. "What if time is the one thing I don't have?" Caroline leaned in, lowering her voice. "Then you make sure you're not alone when it's over." A small voice broke the moment. "Hi." James turned to see Lucy standing at the end of the booth, her hair slightly mussed, a shy smile on her face. Mrs. Thatcher stood a few steps behind, explaining she had errands nearby and thought Lucy might like breakfast. "Good morning, Lucy," Caroline said warmly, sliding over to make room. "We were just talking about Thursday." Lucy climbed onto the seat next to James, wrapping her hands around the hot chocolate the waitress brought without even asking. "Thursdays when they said it would happen," she reminded them, her tone matter of fact. James nodded. "We know. That's why we're being careful." She sipped her drink, then looked between them. "Careful isn't enough. They know you trust them. That's the dangerous part." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "You've got a smart business consultant here." James gave a weak smile, but it didn't last. "Lucy, when you heard them talking, did they say what they wanted? Why they're doing this?" "They said you were getting in the way," she said simply. "And they laughed like it wasn't even about business, like they just wanted you gone." Her words landed heavier than expected. It wasn't just about contracts or money. It was personal. Caroline drummed her fingers on the table. "If that's true, then the business is just the surface. We need to know what's underneath." James nodded, but his thoughts were already racing. "The warehouse," he murmured. "What about it?" Caroline asked. "It's where Lucy heard them. If they're meeting there, maybe there's something. Papers, notes, anything that might tell us what they're planning." Lucy set down her mug. "I can show you exactly where they were, every step." James looked at Caroline. "It's risky." Caroline's gaze didn't waver. "So is doing nothing." For a moment, the 3 of them sat there, the low hum of the diner fading under the weight of what they were considering. Then James nodded slowly. "All right, let's go, but we do it carefully." Lucy smiled weakly, though her eyes carried the same quiet fear that had been there since the night she appeared in his car. Careful is good, but fast is better. As they left the diner, James spotted a figure across the street, partially hidden by the mist, casually leaning against a lamppost. Even at that distance, he could feel the stare fixed on him, the same silhouette, the man in the raincoat. And this time, James noticed with a slow chill, he was smiling. The abduction. The mist clung to Charleston's edges that afternoon when James returned to the inn. He had spent the morning trying to maintain a normal facade at the office, but every interaction with Ellen, every smile from Robert when he passed by his office, seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Mrs. Thatcher emerged from the hallway, drying her hands on a towel. "She's upstairs," she said softly. "Hasn't stirred since breakfast, but I kept the curtains closed like you asked." James nodded. "Thank you." He climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood sounding louder than usual. When he reached Lucy's door, he knocked lightly. No answer. He frowned and turned the handle. The small bed was neatly made. The comforter was perfectly smooth, as if it had never been slept in. On the pillow lay a folded sheet of paper. James crossed the room in 2 strides and opened it. "They're taking me to the seafood warehouse. Be careful. They said you'd come." The handwriting was small, uneven. "Lucy's." His throat tightened. "James?" Mrs. Thatcher's voice drifted from the front hall. "She's not here." He hurried down the stairs, gripping the banister. "When was the last time you saw her?" "An hour ago. Said she was going to read in her room. I checked once. She was there." His gaze swept the room again, looking for signs, anything. The window was locked, no sign of struggle, but there was a second detail that made him pause. The teddy bear he'd seen her clutch every night was missing. He was halfway down the stairs when his phone vibrated. "Caroline." "I can't find Lucy," he said without preamble. "Her bed's made. She's gone. And there's a note saying they took her to the warehouse." Silence. Then, "That's exactly what they want you to think. James, this isn't a kidnapping. It's bait." James stopped on the bottom step, her words sinking in. "You think she left on purpose?" "I think," Caroline replied, "she's smarter than they are, and she's leaving a trail. The question is, what else did she leave?" His mind raced. Her bear was missing. "That's not nothing," Caroline said. "If you have a second to breathe, think about what's inside it." Back upstairs, he searched through Lucy's dresser drawer, looking for the extra sweater she'd wrapped the bear in on the first night. Nothing. But in the corner of the room, on the windowsill, a small piece of paper was tucked under a cracked seashell. It wasn't a note, just a quick pencil sketch. 3 shrimp boats, their hull numbers drawn with careful precision. James stared at it, the image unlocking something in his mind. The sketch wasn't just boats. It was location. Lucy had told him once about the far end of the dock, where 3 shrimp boats were always moored side by side near the rusted chain-link fence. He knew the spot. "She's telling me where to find her," he murmured into the phone. "Then that's where we start," Caroline replied. "But we do it my way." 15 minutes later, Caroline was waiting in the back parking lot of the restaurant, her unmarked sedan idling in the mist. She didn't waste time. "We go in quiet. If someone's watching the main entrance, we use the service dock on the far side. Fewer eyes." James nodded, but he couldn't shake the image of Lucy, small and determined, planting these clues with steady hands. Whatever else she was a survivor, and she was counting on him to follow the trail. "What if she's not there?" James asked. Caroline gave him a look. "Then we figure out where she is next, but we don't skip steps." The drive to the wharf was silent, except for the steady hum of the engine. James rested his hands on his knees, tension rolling through him in slow waves. Caroline pulled into the narrow lane beside the dock, the shadow of the shrimp boats just visible through the mist. The world here smelled of salt and old rope, the planks under their feet slippery with seawater. The sound of water lapping against the pilings was broken only by the faint groan of wood shifting with the tide. They moved toward the far end of the dock, where the 3 boats were moored, exactly as Lucy had drawn. Just beyond them, the glow of a single light spilled from a side door of the warehouse. Caroline held up a hand. "This is where we go slow." They crept along the wall, staying in the shadows. James kept his eyes fixed on the door, every nerve alert. And then he heard it. A faint laugh, high-pitched, quick. Lucy's laugh. It came from inside. He caught Caroline's eye. She nodded once, and they moved closer, silent as the mist around them. Whatever was happening inside that warehouse, they were seconds away from it. And James knew this was the moment when the game stopped being about contracts and meetings. It was about getting Lucy back and making sure this ended before Thursday arrived. Warehouse infiltration. The side door of the warehouse glowed dimly in the mist, casting a slice of light across the wet dock. James and Caroline hugged the shadows, the wood beneath their feet groaning just enough to make James slow his steps. Somewhere inside, that faint laugh came again, Lucy's, but it was followed by the low murmur of adult voices, too quiet to distinguish. Caroline leaned toward him, her breath barely a whisper. She's close, but they're not going to make this simple. James tightened his jaw. Then we don't give them the advantage. They slipped along the wall, stopping outside the reach of the door's light. Caroline gestured toward a small, grimy window several feet up. James braced himself and lifted her by the waist until she could peer inside. She stayed still for a long moment, then came down lightly, her expression unreadable. They have her sitting on a crate near the center, she murmured. She's calm, talking to someone, but Robert's there. And Ellen. This isn't a kidnapping. It's theater. James's brow knitted. Theater? They want you to come in, James. They want you to see her there, and they want you to hear what they've rehearsed. He looked toward the door. Then we need to change the script. Caroline's eyes met his. You're not going in there alone. We do this together. He hesitated, but only for a breath. All right, but we don't scare Lucy. They slipped through the rear service dock entrance, moving between tall stacks of nets and wooden pallets. The space smelled of brine and machine oil. Through the gaps in the crates, James could see Lucy sitting exactly as Caroline described, her legs swinging slightly, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She was talking, but her words were swallowed by the hum of a nearby ice machine. Robert stood a few steps from her, leaning against a work table, posture loose but eyes sharp. Ellen paced slowly, her heels clicking on the concrete like a metronome. They were playing a part, James realized. Casual, unconcerned, as if Lucy's presence there was perfectly ordinary. Caroline touched his arm, her voice low. You hear that? It took him a moment to catch it. The faint sound of papers being shuffled. Ellen had a folder in her hand. She's holding the contracts, James breathed. The ones for Thursday. Caroline's gaze sharpened. Then we get them. They circled wide, keeping behind the tallest stacks of supplies until they were within a few steps of the work table. From here, James could hear Robert's voice more clearly, smooth, rehearsed, almost mocking. And when he comes in, you just say how comfortable you've been here, how safe you feel. That's all. Lucy's response was quiet but deliberate. I'll tell him what I want to tell him. James's chest swelled with pride and concern. She wasn't playing their game, but that could make her a target. Caroline found his hand again, a grounding pressure. Now, she whispered. James stepped forward, his voice carrying just enough to get their attention without startling Lucy. Interesting choice of words, Robert. When he comes in. You were expecting me. Robert's head turned sharply, a flash of surprise breaking his smooth veneer. Ellen's smile was thin, calculated. James, she greeted, all warmth and welcome. We thought you might want to see for yourself that your little friend is perfectly fine. I see that, James said evenly, his eyes on Lucy. But I can't help wondering why she's here. Robert spread his hands, feigning innocence. We were just keeping her company, making sure she didn't get lost in this big city of ours. James took another step forward. Funny, I don't remember asking you to do that. Ellen tilted her head, her voice honeyed but sharp. You've been making things difficult, James, questioning what doesn't need to be questioned. Thursday should be simple if you let it. Lucy's eyes flicked toward him, a look that said, don't believe them. She shifted slightly, her small fingers touching the seam of her sweater. James knew that movement. He'd seen her hide things before. Caroline caught his look and moved subtly to block Robert's view. James crouched slightly to meet Lucy's gaze. You ready to go? Yes, she said without hesitation. Ellen's smile faltered. "She's fine right here." "No," James said, his voice firm but final. "She's fine with me." In that moment, the dynamic shifted. Robert's easy posture hardened. Ellen's fingers tightened around the folder. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Thursday isn't going to happen the way you think it is," he said quietly. "And if you're smart, you'll walk away before it's too late." He turned with Lucy at his side, Caroline close behind. No one moved to stop them, but James could feel the weight of their stares all the way to the door. Outside, the mist wrapped around them again, cold and damp against his skin. Lucy grabbed his hand. "I knew you'd come." James looked at Caroline. "We have work to do before Thursday." Her response was simple. "Then let's finish it." The secret recording. The night air felt colder than it had a right to, as James guided Lucy and Caroline across the dock toward the Range Rover. The mist swallowed the world beyond a few yards, softening the sound of their footsteps but amplifying the echo of his thoughts. Lucy's small hand clung to his, her grip steady, grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. Caroline walked on his other side, her gaze sweeping the shadows. She hadn't spoken since they left the warehouse, but James could feel her thoughts spinning as steadily as his own. When they reached the car, he opened the back door for Lucy. "You're staying at the inn tonight. No wandering, no notes, no adventures?" Her chin lifted just slightly. "I wasn't wandering, I was leaving clues." James crouched so they were eye to eye. "And I followed them. But next time you tell me before you disappear." "Deal?" "Deal," she said softly. Caroline slid into the passenger seat. As James started the engine, she finally spoke. "They let us walk out tonight. That's not generosity. It's confidence." He looked at her. "Confidence in what?" "That Thursday is still theirs," she said. "They think you don't have enough to stop them." The Range Rover rolled slowly through the quiet streets. The gas lamps flickered in the mist, painting the old brick facades in shades of gold and shadow. James's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We have the papers from the warehouse, the contracts, the shipping invoices. Isn't that enough?" "Not unless you can prove they're connected to Robert and Ellen in a way that will stick," Caroline replied. "Otherwise, they'll make it look like a misunderstanding." James exhaled, his mind racing through options. "We need them caught in their own words." Caroline turned toward him, her expression sharpening. "Exactly. And Lucy just gave us the way in." From the back seat, Lucy perked up. "I did?" James looked at her in the mirror. "Your bear." She nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "It's still at the warehouse, right where I left it." Caroline leaned back, a flash of admiration in her eyes. "If it's where you say it is, and if what I think is in there, then we have them," James finished. Lucy looked between them. "What's in it?" James gave her a reassuring smile. "Something that's going to make them wish they never started this." They dropped Lucy at the inn, Mrs. Thatcher fussing over her like a protective hen. James stayed only long enough to make sure she was settled before heading back outside. Caroline was leaning against the car, mist curling around her hair. "You're thinking about what comes after Thursday," she said, not looking at him. He joined her at the car's hood, hands in his pockets. "If I can't stop them, it won't matter what comes after." Caroline's gaze met his then, steady and unwavering. "You've been building things your whole life, James. Restoring houses, restoring history. You know better than anyone that sometimes you have to strip away the rot before the beauty can stand." There was something in her tone, something deeper than strategy. For a moment, the space between them seemed smaller, warmer, like the years hadn't stretched so far after all. "I don't want you caught in the rot," he said quietly. Her lips curved in a faint smile. "Maybe I've been in it long enough to know how to walk without sinking." They stood there in silence for another moment before she broke it. "Tomorrow we get the bear and see if it's holding what I hope it is." James nodded. "And if it is, then," Caroline said, her voice low, "we turn Thursday into their downfall." The next morning, the mist still clung to Charleston's edges. James and Caroline wasted no words on the drive to the docks. They moved quickly along the wharf, their steps muffled by the wet planks. The warehouse loomed ahead, its walls streaked with salt stains and shadow. James tried the side door. It gave with the same reluctant scrape as before. Inside, the dim light carried a faint hum from the ice machine. The stacks of nets and crates were exactly as they'd left them, but there was a tension in the air now, as if the space knew they didn't belong. Carolyn led the way to the spot Lucy had described. Her steps slowed near a pile of tarps, folded in a careless heap. She crouched down, moving them aside until her hand closed around something soft. The bear. Its worn fur looked even smaller in her hands, but James's chest still tightened. She looked at him before beginning to inspect the seams. If she stuffed something in here, it's in the stitching. Her fingers found it quickly. A small tear along the bottom seam, roughly resewn with uneven thread. She pulled gently, opening the gap just enough to slip her fingers inside. When her hand emerged, it was holding a tiny silver digital recorder. James let out a slow breath. She actually did it. Caroline turned it on. A soft click, then static, then voices clear enough to make every hair on James's arm stand on end. Ellen's voice first. "Once Thursday's over, he's out. It's already arranged." Robert's laugh followed, low and certain. "He won't see it coming, and by the time he knows, it'll be signed, sealed, done." Caroline's eyes met James's, her expression hardening. "This isn't just enough. This is everything." Before they could speak again, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Not hurried, measured. Caroline slipped the recorder into her pocket. "We have what we need. Now we get out." They retraced their steps toward the side door, the sound of the approaching footsteps growing clearer. James resisted the urge to look back. The door gave under his hand, and they stepped out into the brightening morning, the mist thinning just enough to reveal more of the dock. They moved quickly to the car. Neither spoke until the Range Rover was pulling away from the wharf. Caroline finally let out a breath. "That recorder, it's not just proof they're planning to take you down, it's proof they've already done part of it." James looked at her. "So Thursday isn't just a meeting anymore, it's an ambush." She looked at him, her voice low. "And now you have the power to turn it into theirs." The rest of the drive was silent, the engine's hum steady under the weight of what they'd just secured. James's mind wasn't on the recorder now. It was on Lucy, on how a child who had lost so much had risked more than most adults would to protect him. And on Thursday, he would make sure it wasn't for nothing. Thursday, the final confrontation. Thursday arrived wrapped in a stillness that didn't feel natural, as if the entire city had decided to hold its breath. James dressed slowly, methodically, the knot of his tie seeming tighter than usual. He checked the recorder one last time before sliding it into his jacket's inner pocket. The proof was there, locked in digital certainty. The voices of Robert and Ellen conspiring to strip him of everything he'd built. Caroline was waiting outside in her sedan. She didn't say good morning, didn't ask if he was ready. She just looked at him, her eyes steady. "You have one shot at this, James. You need to walk into that room like you're the one holding the pen." "Am I?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "They just don't know it yet." The conference room at Whitmore Langston was already occupied when they arrived. Robert was leaning back in his chair, a glass of untouched water in front of him. Ellen stood near the window, posture composed, a soft smile curving her lips. Board members lined the table, their polite conversation muted the way people sound when they're waiting for something decisive to happen. "James," Robert greeted, all warmth and welcome. "Good of you to come. We were just about to begin." James took his place at the head of the table. "Don't let me stop you." Robert glanced at Ellen, who distributed neatly bound packets. "As you'll see in the proposal," Robert began smoothly, "this transition will position the company for long-term growth. James will step back from day-to-day operations, moving into an advisory role, and the incoming leadership team will—" James raised a hand. "Let's pause there." The room fell silent. Ellen's brow tightened by the slightest fraction. "I've been hearing a lot about this transition," James said evenly, "but I wanted to hear it from you too. Why now?" Robert's smile didn't waver. "James, you've built something incredible here. But you've always said timing is everything. This is the moment. James leaned slightly forward. And if I said I wasn't ready, Ellen spoke for the first time, then I'd say, change is never comfortable, but it's often necessary. There it was, the barely veiled certainty that they'd already won. James could feel the board watching him, waiting for his reaction. He let the moment stretch, the silence rippling just enough to unsettle Robert. I've thought a lot about what you two have said, James began slowly. And I agree, change is necessary. Robert's smile returned. Ellen exhaled faintly, relieved. But James continued, there's one thing you both overlooked. He reached into his jacket and placed the recorder on the table. It was a small gesture, but it landed like a stone thrown into still water. What's that? Robert asked, his tone tightening. That I'm not the only person in this room who believes in proof. He pressed play. Ellen's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. Once Thursday's over, he's out. It's already arranged. Robert's laugh followed, lower but equally distinct. He won't see it coming, and by the time he knows, it'll be signed, sealed, done. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of the words seemed to settle into every corner of the room. Ellen recovered first, her tone icy. That could be anyone's voice. It's out of context. Context, James cut in, his voice still calm but sharp. The context is that you've been planning to remove me while presenting this as a legitimate business decision, and you were careless enough to say so out loud, where someone you underestimated could hear. Robert's eyes shot to the board members, but the room's mood had shifted. The careful neutrality on their faces had vanished, replaced by something colder. James leaned back. I'm not stepping back, and after today, neither of you will have any future role in this company. The board chairman cleared his throat, looking around the table. I think we've heard enough to warrant an immediate vote. It was over in minutes. Robert and Ellen left without another word. The click of the door closing behind them was the only sound in the room. James remained seated for another moment, letting the weight of it settle. When he finally stood, Caroline was waiting outside, leaning against the wall. So? She asked. They're out, he said simply. Her lips curved in a slow smile. I told you that you were the one holding the pen. New beginning. They walked out together into the late morning light. The air felt different, lighter, though James knew the work ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in weeks, it was his work again. When they reached the inn, Lucy was on the porch with Mrs. Thatcher, her legs swinging as she perched on the railing. She spotted him and jumped down, running to meet him halfway up the path. You did it, she said breathless. We did it, James corrected, crouching to her level. Couldn't have done it without you. Her smile lit up her entire face. Does this mean we're kind of a team now? The best kind, he said. Caroline watched them, her arms loosely crossed, but her expression softer than James had ever seen it. They spent the afternoon in the garden behind the inn. Lucy knelt in the dirt, planting the flowers she'd gotten from Mrs. Thatcher, her hands covered in soil. James found himself beside her, pressing a young plant into the earth. This place, Lucy said suddenly. This is where I hid that first night, right next to your car. James looked at her, remembering that night vividly. The whisper, the fear in her eyes, the sense that his life was about to change, and he didn't even know why. I'm glad you did, he said quietly. She patted the soil gently. Me too, because now we're family. The words caught him off guard, but they felt true in a way he couldn't deny. Family is who stays with you when everyone else walks away, he said. And you two did that for me. Caroline's voice came from behind them. I think that works both ways. He looked at her, the unspoken things between them no longer feeling like a wall. The sun was beginning to set, bathing the garden in gold. Lucy sat back on her heels, dirt on her cheeks, a smile on her face. James looked at her, then at Caroline, and knew with absolute certainty that Thursday hadn't been about winning a company. It had been about finding the people worth keeping around. A few weeks later, as James signed the new papers for his restructured company, he found a small note on his desk. The uneven handwriting was Lucy's. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Now you have a real family. Lucy. He folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet. Outside, Charleston continued its eternal dance between past and present, between shadow and light. But for the first time in a long while, James Whitmore knew exactly where he belonged. And when Caroline appeared in his office doorway that afternoon, a cup of coffee in one hand and a shy smile on her face, he knew that some stories don't end. They just begin again, with the right people by your side. The rain had stopped, the sun was shining, and a little girl had changed everything. The man in the raincoat was never seen on Charleston's streets again. Some said he had been just a shadow of imagination, but James knew better. Some threats disappear when you finally find the courage to face them. Lucy continued living with Mrs. Thatcher at the inn, but spent most of her days at James's office, doing homework at a small desk he'd set up especially for her. Caroline visited frequently, and the three people who had found each other on a rainy night in Charleston became something none of them had expected to find: a family. And on quiet nights, when the rain returned to the cobblestone streets, James sometimes remembered the first time he heard Lucy's small voice whisper, "Don't say anything, they're listening." Now he knew she wasn't just warning about hidden enemies. She was teaching him to listen to the voices that truly mattered, the people who stand by you when the whole world seems to be against you. If this story touched your heart, leave an amen in the comments. Share this video with someone who needs to renew their faith and hope. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for more inspiring stories of faith, love, and miracles. Tell us, have you witnessed or experienced a miracle? Share your experience in the comments. Remember, God works in mysterious ways and sometimes uses the most unlikely people to perform his greatest miracles. God bless you and your family.